Welcome to the second video on this series on water and the earth. On this one, we're going to be talking about how erosion and deposition work together to change the surface of our planet. Really, they're a part of a big picture of how materials from the continents end up recycled into the oceans. So you're going to have the breakdown of the rock that the continent is made of and the carrying of those rocks through water and wind into the oceans, usually near the continents, into sediments, which then might even subduct or get uplifted, changed, form rock, all different kinds of things in the rock cycle. But the overall picture is that this causes the recycling of materials in the surface of the earth. Now, where one process starts and the other one ends is kind of arbitrary. Erosion is generally referred to the breaking down of the earth's rocks into sediments or tinier particles like sand particles. An example of that would be when wind and water break down the rock, right? Now, there are other kinds of erosion, and we're going to talk more about that on the next video of the series. But then erosion will end up carrying that with rain and wind into usually bodies of water like rivers and streams. And then that's where kind of deposition takes over, because deposition is when those rivers and streams take those sediments and end up placing them somewhere else, usually near the continent at the delta of rivers where the rivers meet the sea. And then an example of this would, of course, be rain and wind carrying the eroded materials into the waters, which then flow into the oceans. Now, I remember deposition because it has to do with depositing or putting it down, right? And it has to do with gravity, of course, because gravity is what's driving the rivers to move towards the ocean, right? So that's the process that mostly drives deposition. Erosion can be driven by a variety of factors, including sunlight, because sunlight is what causes weather and wind. It could be biologically caused, which ultimately also depends on sunlight. But gravity also has an effect on erosion because rocks, slides, and all of that has to do with gravity as well, and rain falls down because of gravity. So those are the sources of energy that drive these processes. How does this match with weathering? Well, some people define weathering as the actual breaking down, erosion as the movement towards an agent, and then deposition, the actual dropping in a final source. So weathering would be things like water, ice, wind, animals, plants growing, all those kinds of things breaking down the rock. And then erosion would be when the water, the ice, the wind, or gravity carry those into streams, which ended up depositing them to form things like dunes or islands or sediment banks near the continental shelf of continents at the delta of rivers. Now, how do these processes work together? Like I said, this is how mountains get eroded and carried into the oceans, slowly but surely by rain, rivers, and wind, right? And so that's an overall picture of this process, and that's almost it for the objective. The one thing I want to like to show you is how this actually kind of works, right? So the Colorado River, for example, carves through the Great Plateau, the Colorado Plateau, and ends up forming an enormous canyon. Now, this canyon was also carved with the help of rain and wind, right, and landslides and animals walking on it, a lot of factors. But primarily, this river ends up carrying it away, so that's the erosion part, and then dumping it near the continent. Now, the Colorado River never actually reaches the ocean. That's pretty sad. We use all the water before it gets then. And in fact, there's many dams on the way. We're going to talk about that in the last video. So a lot of the sediments never get to the sea anymore. But in a place like the Amazon Delta, which is what you see here, seen from a satellite image, you can see how the river is dumping a lot of sediment and nutrients near the continental shelf of the continent, carried from all the erosion and weathering that happened before that. I don't really arbitrarily separate weathering and erosion. I see them as two sides of the same coin. But some people call the actual breakdown weathering the carrying erosion and the placing down deposit. So, and that's how entire plateaus get reduced to sand and dropped by the ocean, right? And that's kind of like the process here. So on the next objective, we're going to talk about the different types of erosion that actually do this all throughout the planet. I'll see you guys then.